Welcome, Governor John Carney. Thanks so much for making the time today.
Great to be with you, Sharon. Thanks a lot.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. And this is a really important topic. We're going to give a few minutes to getting broadband throughout Delaware. But first, can you talk about the internet deserts?
Yeah, so mostly in the rural areas of our state, of course, internet service and broadband connectivity is a privately provided service, utility, if you will. And so utilities extend those connections up and down the line, but mostly where there's a larger population to justify the cost of the installation because they're in business, obviously, and they need enough customers paying in order to justify that infrastructure. And so since the beginning of the administration, 3.5 years ago, we've had a project that was part of our transition plan identified by the business sector and others to basically try to address these broadband deserts, mostly Western Kent and Sussex County in very rural areas, not a lot of customers out there to justify the investment. And so what our role is, what the governor's role is, as is the case in many things in our economy, is where the market doesn't work for whatever reason. In this case, there are not enough customers to justify the capital investment. Government steps in and tries to provide some subsidy to enable that to happen, to enable the utility to get a return on its investment, to provide that service, and to make sure that the citizens of our state get connectivity. And it's so critically important, particularly now in a pandemic.
You know, it's so interesting. I was doing a little research into the Rural Electrification Act of 1936, Roosevelt, and it took decades for rural parts of our country to get electricity. And the same thing happened when cable television became popular. You know, they went first to the big service areas, that's the business model. But as you say, this is pretty critical now when we have so many children who need access to education.
But your observation is exactly right, and that's the economic kind of market-based reason that we have those deserts and the market failures there is that there aren't enough customers to justify the capital investment. And therefore, in the case of electrification, the government stepped in and to provide some subsidy. And as you said, it took years. Yeah, under a COVID-19 pandemic, getting remote learning to students and families is critical, right? It's the only way that teachers are touching their students. Telemedicine has become incredibly important during this time of COVID. And so that connectivity, again, connecting a physician, in many cases, a social worker or counselor, somebody providing psychiatric care, the Zoom, the internet connection is so critically important, and telemedicine is really taken a new place in the delivery of healthcare services in our state and in our country. I hear it from my colleagues across the country.
Pretty soon it'll become a fundamental human right if we're going to close the gap, you know, between rich and poor, or the haves and the have-nots. You got to level the playing field. So you've gotten a $20 million grant. How are we going to proceed here?
Yeah, so the vast majority of those resources are to provide some subsidy to families, low-income families, so that they can subscribe to the internet service providers, some of which over the last 6 months have provided some free subscriptions to low-income customers. We have used state dollars in the past. We did match some of that with local dollars from Sussex County to attach technology and equipment to existing towers that we use for public safety purposes and emergency response personnel. We've used those towers to connect through Wi-Fi, actually technology, provide broadband to some of those deserts in west of Seaford and west of Laurel, mostly,
What do you think the timeline is going to be? We're launching into September here. Kids are, going to start at distance, hoping to God this thing is reined in and they can eventually go to school. But will any of this be in place for kids to start school?
Yeah, so that's the hope with respect to the subsidy, which is where it's about 13 million goes to that. Those subscriptions can be acquired pretty quickly, and so they should be able to be up and running by the start of school. Some of the infrastructure improvements that will build on the work we've already done, that might take a little bit longer. We do have contracts with Blue Surf, I think it's called, which is a Wi-Fi internet provider.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of them before. I looked them up. They're a smaller company, which is nice to see the state, in my point of view, doing business with them.
Yeah, so they competed for that business and were successful. They are a Wi-Fi provider, and so we're early on in this, and so we'll see how it works. We also, in addition to telemedicine, in addition to remote learning for our school children, the big users in these areas are our farmers. They have combines and planters that have
That's
really
right.
sophisticated equipment. They have all their fields plotted in terms of the amount of fertilizer that goes into it, seeding, and all of that. And incredibly technically, I did a tour of one of our farmers' properties down there, and saw one of his sons went away to Virginia Tech on an engineering degree and computer science, and came back and is helping his dad run all this high-tech equipment.
We actually filmed it where they can plant corn within, this much space.
Amazing.
It's fantastic.
And it has great environmental benefits. They don't over fertilize. They use just as much as the crop will take up, and so you don't have that runoff of nutrients into the waterways. And a lot of the pollution in the waterways in lower Delaware is a result of years and years of fertilizing farms and having that kind of runoff. So if you minimize the amount of nutrients you put out there on your crops, and the crops take it up, you just kind of recycle it back into the earth when you plow it under. The next year's crop takes it up, and so on. The alternative in the past was you get big rainstorms, pulls all those nutrients into the ditches and ultimately the waterways into our inland bays, and most of Western Sussex goes into the Nanticoke and ultimately into the Chesapeake Bay.
Well, there's a lot of good reasons then, I know your time's super short, to see this initiative go forward. And I'm going to check back with you, if that's okay, when we get down.
That'd be great. And I should note so everybody knows how their taxpayer dollars are being spent, that the CARES Act funding, as most folks know, are coming from the federal government. It was a package, $1 trillion relief package, most of which went for small business support, Sharon, to your point earlier. So that they could stay alive. Frankly, some of our small businesses have been just devastated. Keep employees on the payroll, and additional resources for education. We mentioned that many of those dollars are going to connectivity and devices for the students. And then we've decided to use some of the money that came to the state to augment and supplement our broadband project that we've been working on now for 3 years. And so really important for telemedicine, for our farmers and for our students, and we'll continue to push forward with it.
Governor John Carney, may the force be with you.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you, and
Thank you,
I'll check back.
we look forward to it.
All right, take care now.